everyone doing? Good. Pankaj told me it's a very high-spirited team. How's everyone doing? Excellent. Excellent. So, what would we like to speak about? I told Pankaj and Karan that we'll do a AMA. So you can ask me anything. I'll give you a little bit of my background. Investor operator background. So ran the life sciences healthcare business for HCL, ran marketing there, ran and IPO'd a SaaS company, and now lead venture capital at Google. So investor operator background, and all through tech, 22 years of tech. So tech is what I know, B2B tech. Worked for a year at Tech Mahindra, where I ran group strategy and business development, and we had a lot of telco clients. So 55% of our business was telco. So seen your world a little bit. What would you like to speak about? What would make this 1 hour useful? And I'm coming from a government meeting, so that's why I'm dressed like this.
You talked about your experience with running a SaaS company and taking it to an IPO. What were some of your learnings during that journey, and what would you attribute some of the factors that led to the success?
It's a very good question. Thank you for asking that, Pratibha. I'll give you a little bit of context. I was hired by the PE people to scale and IPO the company. And the company was growing at 15-20% every year before I joined. 15-20% is what you would expect a very large company to grow. But for a small company, if you're not growing almost 50-60% Q on Q, you're missing the boat. So it was a $10 million company, and in 3 years we took it to 80 million and IPO'd it. So that was the journey. First is instilling that belief and creating very, very healthy dissatisfaction. So what happens is when you're running a company for a few years and you've only seen 15%, 20% growth, that becomes a good number to hit. And most companies are guilty of doing planning basis last year's numbers. And they're not ambitious enough to do planning on what is possible. So last year was 15. If this year we do 20, it's amazing. If last year was 18% EBIT and we do 22%, it's amazing. A fresh perspective comes in and says, hey, why can't we do 100% Q on Q? So the conversation shifts from why can't you do 100% to what is needed to do 100%. So instilling that belief that hyper growth is possible. And in the business of SaaS, CPaaS, PaaS, the rule of 40 is very important. So rule of 40 is between growth and EBIT, your number annually minimum should be 40%. So if you're 20% growth, 20% EBIT. If you're 30% growth, 10% EBIT. If you're 40% growth, you can afford to be not making money, at least short term. So instilling the belief was very important. Second is changing it from a business where there were many employees who had been there for many years. And what tenure does is, it makes a lot of things acceptable. If you lose a customer or a deal, reducing the tolerance for it, that any kind of opportunity loss is not acceptable. Any kind of a P0 outage is not acceptable. So one of the things we instilled in engineering was, how do you create mission critical software? Imagine you're writing code for 747 Boeing. You can't say we had a 98% uptime and 2% the aircraft didn't fly and some people died. Why is that okay in software? Why is that okay in SaaS or CPaaS or PaaS? So mission critical nature of engineering, instilling that in engineering and product. In the product management team, we actually coined a word, creating finger licking screens. Why does enterprise software have screens which still look like SAP or Oracle? At home, you're using Instagram, and in office, you're using clunky software which was created like. So in every team, we instilled a pirate mentality. And we told everybody that there's no fun doing something in 10 years and creating an economic outcome which all of us can be happy about. It's fun to do it fast and create a massive economic outcome where everybody on the floor, when I joined, we were about 70 people. In 3 years, we were 700 people. And we had offices in 20 countries. There was a year where every second month I was opening a new office. And we basically told people if we have to go back with minimum 200, 250K outcome for everybody. And then depending on what you're doing, how critical is the role, your tenure, seniority, effectiveness, maybe even a couple of $1 million. And we have to do this in 2-3 years. We have to do everything to put the numbers on the board. And we went from being an organization where every function, every competency was equally important, to everybody sharply aligning on just 2 metrics: revenue and PAT. So if you were running DevOps or if you were running infrastructure, you were constantly focused on reducing cost and improving the quality of infrastructure. Every team had a different metric. The reason why the company was growing at 15-20%, HR thought they had done their numbers. Engineering thought they had done. Everybody's OKR was being met. We basically cleaned it up and aligned the whole company on just 3 things. CSAT being one. So goal congruency is the other thing which really led to this rapid growth. And I think a lot comes from spirit. So we always said a no is a maybe. And a maybe is a different yes. Definitely a yes. Doesn't apply in personal life, so don't try it. But does apply in B2B. We're very aggressive, right? So we went after named customers. We sunset, when we started, I onboarded a lot of leadership team. The company had 10 products. In first year, we killed 4. We wiped out $3.5 million of our revenue for a $10 million company. We basically said there's no use doing 10 things. Do 2 or 3 and try to get scale and try to get to a level where you're winning 50-55% of bids. Most companies are guilty of having too many product lines. Or even at a product level, having too many features, too many screens, which are often not used. So focus was a very, very important thing. Cutting down on a lot of initiatives, a lot of things which people were doing. Everybody was busy, everybody was working hard. So we changed direction and speed and combined both to momentum and velocity. Does that make sense?
Apurva, I'll just, this is a perfect context being set here. So you've seen the scaling, you've talked about scaling from 10 million to 80 million, right? You earlier did an HCL, and so HCL was a multi-billion dollar to a 10 million. Then you went on to a Tech Mahindra, and then switched to the investor side of it. So how does it feel to see from a 100K to 1 million journey?
Very good. So that's an interesting question. So I invested in a company at a pre-product, pre-revenue stage. one of the things I share with Pankaj is both of us are active investors. SaaS company started by two second-time founders. None of them, so the previous founder had sold his, one of the founders has sold his previous company to WNS for 20 million. The other founder was a young person who had created a luxury Ayurveda brand. They started a company. The way a company starts, the previous founder had some tech background, so he called up some techies who used to work for him. They got together, they started creating wireframes. The first thing I said is, sell to product roadmap, don't sell to existing product. Your existing product should always lag your product roadmap by 12 months. And I'm telling you something very provocative. If you're selling to current reality, there will always be somebody who is ahead of you. And reality can never, by the nature of reality, be very exciting. So sell to product roadmap, sell to wireframes, but stick to commitments. Selling to product roadmap doesn't mean it will never get delivered. Might be delayed, but eventually it should get delivered. So sell to product roadmap, very important for 0 to 1. Actually, even for 1 to 100. 0 to 1 is 0 to 1 million. Usually you also have 1 to 10 and then 10 to 100. So sell to roadmap. Second, because you don't have revenue or very little revenue, say you're doing 2-3 million or say you're doing 500K, your share of mind and your brand has to be far bigger than your company. If you're 50 of you in a room, outside, if somebody doesn't check LinkedIn and see how many employees you have, they should feel that the way this company operates is a 5,000 people company. And the way it happens is every customer touch point, whether it's a proposal you send or an offer letter for an employee, or the way you run a team meeting, or the way you handle a customer escalation, or the way you prepare for a customer call, everything has to be world class. The moment you make it world class, people start thinking they are far bigger. And a lot of people don't come to your offices. So you don't need a snazzy office with a golf course. But every customer interaction has to be that of a 5,000 people company when you are a 5 people company. I was helping the founders as one of the lead investors. I remember this RFP which had come from Nestle. For a company which was doing 10 lakh rupees a month revenue, that time they spent 7 lakhs getting the RFP formatted, designed, marcomed, eventually won a 500K deal, which for a company which was doing 10 lakhs, $500,000 annual contract value is decent. And play to win. Qualify the opportunity hard, but once it's qualified, there's no second place. Second place is a waste of everybody's time. You have to win, whatever is required. If it means somebody going away from the family and camping at the customer site, somebody figuring out who are the ex-rainmakers in the company, whatever is needed, play to win. Stop playing for the sake of playing. It's a criminal waste of time if you're playing for playing. They also, you'll see LinkedIn articles, play to learn, and it's more fun learning when you're winning. There's this whole HR thing. You either win or you learn. I'm not a strong believer in it. You win and you learn. You lose and you learn maybe how to lose. Hey, all kinds of things. If you write play to learn, maybe you will get 30,000 likes. If you write play to win, you will get maybe 3,000 messages saying, what are you saying? What kind of lifestyle is this? But it's so important to play to win. In a startup, 50 people into 2,000 hours a year. If you're working 9 hours a day. 1920 to 2,000 hours. That's it. That's the bandwidth you have. There's no scope for play to learn. If you're making an offer that candidate should join, if you're rolling out a campaign, the conversion should happen. If you're sending a bid, the bid should be won. Very, very important. Very important in 0 to 1. Obviously, when your revenue increases, you have a PAT of 20%, 25%, you can afford to be more relaxed, play to learn, startup. Very important too.
I'll go back to the point where you talked about shutting down 4 out of 10 products, right? How did you decide which 4 to shut? That was a decent revenue, right? That was 35% of the revenue. So how did you decide on that?
So we looked at a couple of things. We said what is the market size and how competitive is the market. In some of those products, we were one of the 25, 30 SaaS players with our offering. We looked at what is our conversion in terms of how many bids do we win when we send out RFPs, responses. We looked at what is our score on G2, Capterra, our product CSAT, NPS. We looked at what are the margins we are making. In one of the 3 products we shut down, we were making good margins. But even then, we dispassionately shut it down. But in most of the cases, the market was large, but very competitive. We were not a leader. We were somewhere in top 10, between 7 and 10. We were not winning a lot. But because the products had been there for so long, there was somebody emotionally vested in it. Either the engineering leader would not allow you to kill it because they would say, "Arey, mere team ka kya hoga?" Or the product manager would say, "No, tomorrow is going to be bright." Last 5 years have not been bright. But this feature is a game changer. So there was always someone, and for some reason it was not getting killed. So we said, think company first. Don't think team, don't think product. Think company first. Dispassionately will kill it. Company will assure you are taken care of. And you have something meaningful to do. But as the involved party, you have 0 votes in this. It's all data driven. Here is the data. Yeah. Hard decision, but it worked very, very well. Because it freed up people. The product roadmap for some products became faster. The support, customer support and GSD became better. The implementation timelines crashed. The marketing dollars became sharply aligned. Focus is a very, it's a superpower. We actually trained everybody a lot to say no, both internally and externally. It becomes very tempting. Customer has asked for something, customize, change, keep changing. You got an order for a horse and you delivered a camel with all the changes.
You got paid for what?
You have to deliver to outcomes, but at times you have to coach the customers. Customers might not know best. Often they don't know best. That's why you are a SaaS player and they are into customization. But you, of course, need seasoned people who are doing the pushback with a relationship. Yeah. So usually a good idea is to have someone who is techno-commercial as the interface between the customer and the engineering team. That techno-commercial person can either be a product manager, and if it's a product manager, you need a product manager who is very, very savvy in terms of relationship management and who is able to show to the customer why this extra feature will not help the customer at all. Maybe the feature is required because their internal workflow is messed up. I'm doing something wrong, and now I need your help in automating that wrong. Is that smart? But you can't tell the customer that. But you need to be explained to the customer that, hey, we work with so many customers. 99% do this. The 1% which doesn't do this and which does what you are doing has no incremental benefit. And then just make it, at times the customer is vested in that idea of customization because it was their idea. So you need a very nice way of navigating. But frankly, in a lot of deals, we walked away and we said, we're not going to do it. Nobody in the world does this. You're doing this for whatever reason. And we explained to them. They went with competition, which was fine. Every business is not good business. There are some customers which will suck in all the bandwidth, which will perennially be unhappy, which will not make your team feel good, and which will be low margin. Even if it is a big brand, it's okay too. It's a huge market. It's a very big market. And you are still between 0 to 100. And once you get free from that, you can always find more profitable, better customers.
I would like to ask you a question. What's most important, especially when in a SaaS company, when you're in the growth phase and stuff like that? Say, for example, where we are. Product excellence and reliability. Marketing, wherein you said it should be a 5-star or a 7-star experience and stuff. Or is it RevGen, revenue generation and sales?
I don't think it's a either or. Imagine you're doing great marketing. One of my favorite examples is IBM. IBM came up with this big smarter planet, smarter commerce, smart grid, smart this. I don't know how many of you have seen that campaign. They created a massive market for business intelligence, and that market was actually taken by other players. If you have great marketing, but the product reality doesn't keep up, good marketing kills a bad product faster than it would have died, leaving engineering with no time to catch up. So there has to be a healthy tension between what your marketing and what your reality is. And unfortunately, there's no mathematical formula. But if the reality is like 30 kilometers away from what you're marketing, you'll get into the valley of disappointment. If you call yourself a product company, it is table stakes to have a world-class product. Mediocre products will lead to massively mediocre outcomes. The outcome does not, the difference between the first 2-3 players in a market and the 10th player is almost by a factor of 100. The difference is not 1/10, it's by a factor of 100 in software. It's such a coagulated market. So if you say I'm doing SMB versus mid-market versus enterprise, CPaaS. If you're doing enterprise and say you only have, your product is say, me too, there's nothing unique, you'll find it far harder to sell. You will invest more time selling. You will invest and spend more money retaining. You will end up doing customizations. If your product is the standard from either reality or from product roadmap, maybe the reality will take time to catch up. But even if your product roadmap is world class and you're being able to sell that vision to the customer, you're good. SaaS is an unforgiving business. You might create a small company, 20 million, 10 million, but for you to have a sizable economic outcome, it has to be all three. World-class product, world-class brand and marketing, and world-class customer experience. How was the sales experience? How was the onboarding experience? How was the customer support experience? How was the billing experience? How was the governance experience? So quarterly business reviews, reporting, everything has to be world-class. It's the whole customer experience journey. It's not one touch point. A simple thing we did is, one of our products was a revenue management product. We started showing on the UI how much money the customer was saving by using the product. That automatically increased our retention rate by 800 BPS, 8% in 1 year. Yeah, some customers would dispute the calculation and say not this, but still you're making money and we're showing it to you. And the moment you get into PLG, product-led growth, which means your product is so good, so incredibly good. Somebody very famous said, I think it was Steve Jobs, he said a bloated sales and marketing team, a lot of people, basically shows a poor quality product. So when WhatsApp was sold, it had 49 people, it was sold for 17 billion to Facebook. One salesperson who was the founder, 48 engineering and product. But then every person has to be able to walk on water. The other model also works. A lot of sales and marketing, little engineering, but it's very hard to be a world leader. You'll be a player, you'll make money. In software companies like yours and mine, a very important parameter which investors look at is revenue per employee. So revenue per employee is a very important factor. Yeah.
Hi, Apurv, Chandan. So you just actually ended saying revenue per employee, right? And I think the goal always should be more revenue per employee as you go forward, which would then imply saying that you need more productivity, which is where you started. I just want to get a better feel for when you said you entered RateGain, it was at a certain revenue rate, you scaled it up to about 3 to 4x in less than that much time in years, right?
8x.
Yeah,
In 3 years.
Even better. So if I wanted to get inside your mind and say that when you came in and you saw what's on the ground and you said, okay, I can't do 20 things at once. There are 3, 4 or 5 things that you would have said are the 80-20 ones that you want to do. What was the thought process that sort of, you went with? And then what were the basic top 3 points that sort of came out? You said, these I want to address. And not at a very bird's eye view, something a little more tangible. And why I'm asking this question very selfishly is that, okay, I want to sit with him and we want to do something similar. So just to sort of get that good sort of guidance, that where did you start looking at? What were you able to sort of identify? And broadly, what made you think that these are the things I want to focus on?
So I joined RateGain when I was 34, 35, 36 maybe. I used to run marketing at HCL. Prior to running marketing at HCL, I ran the life sciences healthcare business. I was the chief of staff to the CEO. My office in HCL was possibly 350, 400 square feet, overlooking beautiful golf course kind vista with waterfalls, colorful fountains with music. And I had an admin assistant ever since I was 28 years old. 350 people team, out of which 170 were a part of my portfolio. Largely from good colleges, engineering, MBA. $8.8 billion company. To now suddenly working with a startup where the talent was patchy. Everything from running your sales pipeline to looking at engineering defects to reviewing the product roadmap. I had never done it. Because you always had people who did it and then you managed people. I think it took me a couple of days to. So when I joined, the first day the HR person came to me and she told me, here is your induction plan for a week. And they had done it thinking that I'm coming from a big company. This is what I would expect. All meetings with CHRO, this, engineering head, product head. I looked at it and I said, who are my commercial leaders, sales leaders? I just want to meet them. Met them, I asked them, is there a big event happening where I can meet customers? One of them said, there's a very big event happening in Berlin starting tomorrow. I said, are we going to be there? They said, yeah, some people are going. I said, cancel my induction. I took the 8 p.m. flight. I only came back to office a month later. So, when you're saying prioritization, the number one prioritization has to be your time with the customer. Everybody's time with the customer. If your product people are not, at least 25% time is not going in front of customers. They can't feel the pain. They can't humanize the ticket. If a trouble ticket comes, you will very mathematically assign it a P0, P1, P2. You don't even understand what's the customer going through. I never got inducted, by the way. After finishing that event in 3 days, I said, tell me which is a large deal going on. I want to meet customers for the top 5 deals. So, before jumping to any kind of prioritization, first is take the customer lens. When you're cutting things, take the customer lens. Second, talk to as many people, because in any company there's a lot of context. Why was this done? Why are we doing it this way? And a lot of context is just context. Oh, we started doing it like this and then it just remained. Nobody questions it. Third, do the numbers. Do the numbers, but take the decision emotionally. Because it will have real world impact. There'll be people who will be very attached to it. Everybody has to win in the decision. Or at least feel less bad than they would have. But do run all the numbers. So my most valuable investment was a young data analyst whose only job was, if I had a thought, run the numbers and get it to my mailbox as soon as possible. And everybody in the company understood that, whether it's the engineering leader, product leader, finance, HR, if there is a data request, data is nobody's Jagir. We started publishing monthly reports to everybody in the company, which were phenomenal. Cost of sales, margin, which country is making money, which country is losing money. And it was unbelievable. People said, my God, this is... What it started doing is it started creating some healthy tension. The product manager would get up and say, hey, why are you trying to sell into this country? It doesn't make money. And there could be a very good reason, but convince me. The moment very few people know this data, by the way, one of the very big myths is, if somebody has access to your business plan, they can execute it. Itna easy thodi hota hai. I can give you your number one competitor's business plan. Forget about you, they also might struggle executing it. So share as much data with the whole team as possible. Because frankly, there's no monopoly that the best idea will come from you or me. And incentivize selfless behavior. So we every time said, if there is a problem and we can throw code at it, software code at it, and we can throw people at it. In short term, throwing people or money at it will be more expensive. But let's do that. That's how you build for scale. Otherwise, what happens is, for every customer onboarded, you need more engineering, you need more support, you need more implementation. Yeah. Let me give you an example. any kind of software, whether it's custom or package, implementation requires testing. When you're a startup, you would say, rather than writing automated test scripts or using a world-class testing software, let's throw testers. The more your business grows, the testers will keep getting added. And because you have a large testing team, they have zero interest in automating. That's what their team does. Why would they automate it? And they'll give you enough reasons why it can't be automated. No, this is VAPT, this is that. There are 30 kinds of testing. No, but because we customize this a lot, we can't test it now. Of course, you can't be a people-less organization. But every year, if you start with a zero base, and see why there are so many people in this team, what are they doing? What are they really doing beyond the PPT? See, the moment you go from 10 to 50, 50 to 100 people, every team starts becoming a slide. And the level of abstraction which happens, you often lose touch with what are they actually doing. So it is important to unpeel the level of abstraction and get into what do they really do. करते क्या हैं? And keep asking, करते क्या हैं? क्यों करते हैं? किसका फायदा होता है? ये करना चाहिए भी कि नहीं? कितने पैसे लगते हैं? How does it add to the pat? And I was an industry outsider. I had never sold travel and SaaS, travel and hospitality SaaS. First principle thinking. It really helps. It will help you prioritize.
Google Venture Fund. Tell me about two super good potential startups which did not live up to it. And what was your analysis why they did not?
My investments or general?
Whatever you've seen, personal, professional.
So firstly, I'll give you a disclaimer. I'm quite unreasonable with myself and with what I think success is. Karan will, he's bared the brunt of that expectation. Ever since I started using WhatsApp, it's a single status message. Go big or go home. Anything less than a 100x outcome doesn't work. Because investing itself is a highly risky game. These are not listed companies. In a listed company, your share price could go down by 20%, 30%. But if you invested 100 rupees, you could sell on Zerodha or ICICI Direct and still get that 70 rupees. T plus 2 is clearance, third day you'll get the money. In angel investing, and conventional wisdom says, stuff like only 20% of your investment will succeed, and I don't get that. Why would you want to do something where only 20% succeed? But it happens in a lot of cases. 2011, I invested in a AR company. 60 lakhs of revenue. Founder, who was a PhD from University of Manchester, had actually worked on, so University of Manchester is famous for creating the hardest material in the world. Harder than platinum, and he had actually worked on that. He was a PhD. I invested in the company. The company's revenue today is about 38 crores. They've always been profitable. I invested at 60 lakhs revenue, I think 5 crore valuation. This is 2011. Valuations went crazy. But even then, 5 crores was a lot from that time. Today, the company is valued at 75 crores. I've been an investor in it for 11 years. And I think it's a big disaster. My learning is there is something called being too early, not timing the market. Nothing was ready. Hardware wasn't ready. That same technology from AR went to AR to VR to XR to Industry 4.0 to now Metaverse. Same पानी है, अब वो बन गया sparkling water. Now you're paying, वो 10 rupees के bottle का you're paying 500 rupees. But I was so early. Every time I think, okay, this year is a breakthrough because the name changed. When it became from XR to VR, I said, yeah, now the company will do very well, I'll get an exit. VR say XR. This is amazing. Sounding even better, and everybody is doing Pokemon. Now it became Industry 4.0. Now enterprises are buying it. They're creating digital twins. Now I'll get an exit. Last year, Mark Zuckerberg has invested $60 billion. Zuckerberg will make it work. Metaverse will become big and I'll get an exit. Timing of the market is very important. Far more important, you could have a very good team, very good this thing. Timing it is very important. When to enter the country, when to enter what customer. It's like cricket, right? At times you promote a batsman. The batsman typically bats at number 8, but you send him 3 down. So that's one. Great founder. अच्छा business चल रहा है. It's become a धंधा. It's profitable business, taking out money. अच्छा चल रहा है. I'm waiting for the next iteration. From metaverse to something else. Another company, I invested, emotional investing is bad by the way. One of the rare emotional investments. I met somebody who was into medicinal cannabis. CBD and medicinal cannabis. So during COVID, I was cycling a lot. I was doing 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers. And I had gone from being massively unfit to being very fit. And cycling had become almost like a meditation for me. Every day I would get up at 2:33 at night, cycle 100 kilometers, 150 kilometers. I was cycling so much that I got plantar fasciitis. So for many months, I could not, if I was standing a lot, my feet were hurting like crazy. It was hurting 24/7. Every couple of hours, I had to soak my feet into ice and leave it there. My average calorie burn a day was some 9,000, 10,000 calories. So I met this person who had traveled all over the hills in Uttaranchal, Himachal, had been consuming a lot of spiritual stuff, and had discovered the power of hemp and cannabis. Hemp is a super protein. If you mix it with flour or eat it as hemp hearts. And it discovered that medicinal cannabis is amazing for pain relief. I met him, forgot about the meeting. He messaged me on LinkedIn, he got my address and sent me a packet of medicinal cannabis. I used it and it was amazing. The reason why I can walk around a little and is because of that. I was wearing Asics for the longest time. And because I was not, so from getting that adrenaline release daily to not getting that dopamine and adrenaline any, I put on more weight, I stopped. So for me, it was godsend. And I thought, this should help many people. Emotional decision, invested in the company. the reason why this might not turn out to be that great is for any business to succeed, you need a full ecosystem. Allopathic doctors don't want to prescribe homeopathic or Ayurvedic. Lot of misconception around medicinal cannabis. 99% of parents in India or spouses would say, cannabis? Are you crazy? For any startup to change everybody's mind, you can't do it on $500,000 funding because you're trying to create a market. Some people can at times, but it's very hard. So, 2 learnings. When emotional, don't invest. And time the market. Best investing is you say no twice. It's like test cricket. The best investors leave far more balls than they hit. So you have to move from FOMO to JOMO, joy of missing out.
It again comes down to timing, right?
Timing.
Even the exit timing.
Even the exit timing.
Hi Apurv, myself Parul. I'm the director HR here. So you can have a laugh, no worries. You have anyway been making a little fun of HRs, so I'm okay with that. Okay, so my question is, as you earlier mentioned in your talk, that in spite of being a 50 people organization, we can pretend and make a perception for people that we are a 5,000 people organization. So what is it from the HR's perspective I can do for Enablex that we can actually have that perception in the market?
So I'll just correct. I was not recommending any of you should pretend. Most people equate size with being world class. You can be a 1-person company and you can be world class. So that's the first thing. So it's not pretension, it's actually believing. It's actually seizing the day. It's actually seizing the moment. It's saying no to average. It's saying no to good. Good is average. It's the same thing. It's a different name. It's a shorter name. Good is the biggest abuse somebody can give you. He's so good, man. I'll give you my thesis on HR. I think somewhere HR has lost the plot. Globally. It's not about this company. I don't know what do you do, but the reason is somewhere because of the whole IR background and industrial relations background, HR started from factories, right? Lots of people. A lot of HR professionals are taught and thought that their job is comp and ben, their job is organization design, their job is performance management. But if you actually do first principle thinking, they just have 3 jobs. First job is to simplify the life of an employee. Reduce number of policies. Simplify the person's life. Can joining be easy? Can onboarding be easy? Can exit be easy? Can offer letters be easy? Can appraisals be easy? For 50 people, maybe you have 10 managers. On an average, 4-5 people reporting. How can you unlock the potential of managers? By reducing the time they spend managing. So simplification, radical simplification. By doing fewer but more meaningful reviews. By reducing meetings. Why should work be so complex? And if you just look at everybody's calendar, I do this every week. Every Friday I look at my calendar. So if you're using Google Workspace, you can color code your meetings. So mine is customer meetings or partner meetings are purple. Internal meetings are green. Everything else is red. Review, this, that. Your red percentage can't be more than 10% in a week. How many recurring meetings are there? Are meetings more than 25 minutes. Like in Google, we typically don't have meetings which are 25 minutes, more than 25 minutes. And a lot of meetings are standing only. Because the moment you sit down, chai, coffee comes, biscuit comes. Simplification is first. Second is empathy. The moment you flip HR hats from being the teacher or the principal in the room with a whip, and your role becomes, can the organization have more empathy for its employees? Empathy comes from being fair, being transparent, being just, and generally letting people have a good time while they work. You're running a startup, it's incredibly hard. But if everybody is stressed, it's not an ideal outcome. So deep empathy, including at times telling the founder or telling the board members, why are we doing this? It's hard, but somebody has to be the adult. It's not human resources. Resources are like, a pack of chemicals, a brick. Use resources. That's what resources, right? You're not in a factory, you're all knowledge workers. If HR was called unlocking talent, maybe every day you would imagine what you should be doing better. It can be such a fantastic function. And third, I think, is unexpected value. For HR to have a seat at the table, it has to be a business role. It can't be only about next year's budget planning and doing one L&D exercise. I tell all my startups, you should not have a L&D function. Everything is on YouTube. It's a full L&D department. You have a L&D department with 10 billion videos. Should you really be spending time on paying people to get trained? They will anyways forget the training because they have done it unwillingly. Half the training they'll be checking emails. So a lot of functions which are conventionally done in HR are not relevant anymore. All functions are important if they do first principle thinking. It's not about writing more lines of code. It's about delivering a product which is amazing. And see, metrics also, start confusing you. HR metrics, cost per hire. Why is it not value per hire? Why is it cost per hire? A lot of these metrics which people read about in books, and they take you away from first principle thinking. I'll give you an example. Karan wanted my profile to introduce me, and he sent me a message. He said, Apurv, the website is okay, your personal website, but it looks very promotional. My reply to him was, I use it as a Dropbox. It's a storage mechanism for my pictures and my profile. Just first principle thinking. Don't go by what is written on social media, what people say. You should know what are you doing and why are you doing it. Not because the founder is asking you, your boss is asking you, your CFO is asking you. If it doesn't make sense, engage and say it doesn't make sense. We are perpetuating the absurd. Because our view is colored by suboptimal experiences we've had. We've worked somewhere. This is what we have said was being done. We've never questioned. We've not been allowed to be questioned. If we have questioned, we've been told, क्या question पूछ रहे हो? ऐसे कोई पूछता है? Who says the annual plan has to be 30 pages? Why can't it be one page summarized succinctly? If it is not brief, that means you yourself are not clear kya kar rahe ho. You can have backups and all, but why can't everything be one page? The more you write, the more meetings you do, that means nobody is clear. And you are perpetuating the absurd. Maybe you'll be one of the first HR leaders who have genuine empathy for unlocking employee potential. I have, but largely in smaller companies. In larger companies, it's very hard. In one of my previous companies, Karan will vouch, massive HR team, very big HR team. Always busy, very well intentioned, but always busy. You can just switch it off. You can just hit it on the side, it'll, thank you. So I asked the HR person, I said, you are the HR business partner for a team with 350 people. How many employees do you meet every week? Couple of them every week. I try not to meet them because it's not a scalable method. I try to automate, what are you doing rest of the time? I'm creating process documents. I'm busy filling forms. I'm responding to audit queries. I'm handling escalations. A lot of things. Small company, you can definitely do it. And then when you get into a large company, or when your company becomes large, you have to have the personal charisma and influence in the CXO team to say, I'll run it like this. In any company, small company, large company, you can be effective if you have influence. If you don't, influence doesn't come with designation, by the way. Influence comes because other peers think you have logic, you have authenticity, and you are adding value. Would love to hear any divergent opinions.
I think people will start coming. Yeah.
While I get it when you say there's YouTube, I think it's equally incumbent on organizations to help in skill enhancement of people.
It is,
It is. And
but maybe not,
but
maybe through
unfortunate-
managers.
Sorry?
Maybe through managers and not.
No, I agree with that. And that's why, a lot of time HR folks call it L&D, and I always say skill enhancement, because I think that's very,
See, if
very
the 15
critical.
managers here in this room can take personal responsibility for training their people, there's no better training ground. And rather than doing training once a quarter, do it every day. Do it while you work with people. The moment you say this will be 1 week, 1 day, 1 course, that's what I was. Thank you so much for a patient listening. Think about all this. If none of it makes sense, discard it. Thank you.